In the spring of whispers tore through the pits like wildfire, Smokey Yunick was back. And he brought something illegal to Daytona. A black and gold Camaro, unlike anything Chevrolet dared to build. Dared in darkness, hiding tricks no rulebook could catch. Tuned by the maddest genius in racing, Ladder. This car would be owned and raced by Don Yenko himself. This wasn't just a car. It was a loaded weapon aimed straight at NASCAR's heart. A machine born of defiance, forbidden engineering, and one man's obsession with bending reality and the rules to his will. It was the dawn of the pony car wars. Ford had already lit the fuse with the Mustang, and Chevrolet was ready to fight back. But the battlefield wasn't just the showroom floor. It stretched to Lemon, Daytona, and Bonneville. And somewhere in that chaos, one man, one brilliant, rebellious genius, would rewrite the rulebook of American motorsport. That man was Henry "Smokey" Yunick Mechanic, innovator, trickster, man both feared and admired, hated and revered, often in the same breath. Smokey didn't just bend the rules. He dismantled them, studied their bones, and rebuilt them in ways no one else dared to imagine. And his weapon of choice, a mysterious black Camaro car. Number a machine so infamous that decades later, historians still argue over exactly what it was and what it wasn't. The beginning of a legend. Smokey Yunick wasn't like other mechanics. While most men turned wrenches, Smokey turned loopholes. At him, every racing rulebook was a cryptic puzzle begging to be solved. And the brand new Camaro had just handed him the cipher. Chevy's latest creation was sleek, low, and inherently fast. A weapon born to slice through air and carry speed where others faltered. Its wide stance, lightweight frame, and generous engine bay made it versatile enough to house both small block and big block. VS. But where engineers saw potential, Smokey saw something more. A blank canvas to obliterate over FIA and USX production speed records across 2 displacement classes, and maybe, just maybe, to humiliate Ford's growing Trans Am dominance along the way. Smokey Yunick had a bold vision, and to make it possible, he knew he needed more than just stock power. He set out to build 2 beasts, one engineered for precision and the other for sheer brute force. The first was a horsepower small block, quick revving and relentless, while the second was a disguise horsepower big block, cleverly presented as optional heavy-duty parts available through Chevrolet catalogs. On paper, everything appeared perfectly legal. Car used solid lifters, Muni 4-speeds, posi-traction rear ends, and stock leaf spring setups. Every specification aligned with official regulations. But behind the scenes, Smokey completely rewrote the Camaro's DNA. He relocated front suspension points for sharper cornering, Z-cut, and rewelded the subframe to lower the center of gravity, and acid-dipped body panels to shed weight without leaving visible traces. To push the limits even further, Smokey smoothed the underbody for reduced aerodynamic drag, raked back the windshield and flushed the drip rails to improve airflow, reshaping the car like a jet fighter slicing through the air. Every inch of the number Camaro was weaponized for speed. Yet in true Smokey fashion, it looked stock, red stock, and by the rulebook's letter was stock. To the world, Smokey's Camaros were whispered to be Chevy's new homologation special track weapon. But the insiders knew the truth. These weren't factory G at all. They were ordinary Camaros, meticulously disguised. Smokey used badges, machining, and engineering sorcery. So intricate it bordered on espionage. He wanted the competition guessing. He wanted officials paranoid. He wanted whispers in every paddock from Daytona to Riverside. And that's exactly what he got. The unusual detour. By September of Smokey had his sights locked on Bonneville. October was reserved, his team was prepped, and the Camaro was ready to dismantle history. But Smokey Yunick didn't believe in straight roads, metaphorical or literal. Instead of heading directly to Utah, he made an unscheduled detour to Riverside Raceway in California. The Budmore Mercury Cougar team, Ford's pride and joy in the Trans Am wars, was their testing for the upcoming mission. Smokey decided to send them a message they would unforget. He called Jim McFarland from Hot Rod magazine and told him to meet him at Riverside. When McFarland arrived, he found Smokey flat, towing the mysterious black Camaro behind a battered pickup. The Camaro looked wild and alive, bugs splattered across its nose, Florida plates hanging crooked, and Smokey grinning like a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. Smokey hadn't come to watch, came to make a point. Of the 3 Camaros Smokey built, number was the one that stirred the most fear and fascination. Black paint, experimental geometry, a setup so radical that rivals whispered its existence in hushed tones. Don Yanko, the muscle car king, would later get his hands on it and race it himself, layering another chapter into the Camaro's mythology. But nobody fully understood what Smokey had created. Some swore the Camaro contained prototype GM parts the company hadn't yet released, hidden technology that gave it an advantage over every other car on the track. Others claimed the body itself didn't even match Chevy's production specs, suggesting Smokey had fabricated a phantom Camaro, one that legally slid through FI tolerances, but bore no resemblance to anything rolling off Chevrolet's assembly lines. The whispers grew louder. NASCAR officials were suspicious, rival teams were terrified. And Smokey Yunick, he was thriving. Tension builds. As October approached, the tension was unbearable. Smokey's Bonneville attempt wasn't just another record run. It was a siege against the limits of engineering, regulation, and ego. Over FIA and USAC records were within reach, and every rival manufacturer knew that if Smokey succeeded, history would be rewritten in black and gold ink. Behind the scenes, Ford began to panic. Quiet lobbying took place in back rooms aimed at FIA officials demanding clarifications to close loopholes they feared Smokey might exploit. Rumors spread that Ford wanted the entire event delayed or canceled. But Smokey Yunick had lived his entire life fighting bureaucrats and beating them at their own game. To him, racing wasn't about beating other drivers. It was about beating the system itself. And the number Camaro was his declaration of war. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement. Every shaved pound, every hidden modification, every whispered rumor carried a single unified message. You cannot stop me. The storm before Bonneville. As the team prepped for Utah, the black Camaro sat under shop lights, silent and coiled, like a predator before the strike. Mechanics tuned carburetors with steady hands, swapping gears and balancing cams as Smokey leaned against the workbench, smoke curling into the dim air. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He didn't explain because Smokey Yunick already knew how this story would start. Ford thought they were ready to defend their dominance. The FIA thought they understood the rules well enough to contain him. Rival teams thought they had the resources, the engineering, and the muscle to stand a chance. They were wrong. Bonneville was waiting. The salt flats would decide everything. Smokey was ready to unleash the beast. Ford was ready to stop him. And somewhere in the shadows, Don Yanko had already placed his bets on the Camaro's success. Knowing that if Smokey's plan worked, the number car would become legend. What came next wasn't just a race. It was a revolution. A storm was coming. One that would blur the line between genius and sabotage, between engineering and rebellion. And Smokey Yunick was about to step into it head first. The Camaro number sat outside Smokey Yunick's Daytona Beach shop, its black and gold paint glowing under harsh fluorescent light. Inside the garage, the air was thick with the sharp temps of oil and gasoline. Smokey, with his trademark cigar dangling lazily from his lips, wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag, his mind already steps ahead of everyone else. This wasn't just another car. This wasn't just another trip. Smokey Yunick never did anything by accident. Not the cars he built, not the records he broke, and definitely not the secrets he kept. What began as a simple cross-country drive would soon spiral into one of the most audacious, calculated, and defiant chapters in American motorsport history. By September, Smokey had a single goal: Bonneville. He had reserved October dates at the legendary Salt Flats, determined to etch his name and his Camaros into motorsport history forever. But Smokey Yunick wasn't built to follow the straight roads, not even metaphorical ones. Somewhere between Daytona Beach and Utah, an idea sparked. Riverside International Raceway in California was calling, a battleground where the Budmore Mercury Cougar team had been making headlines, and whispers of Ford dominance were growing louder every week. Without hesitation, Smokey changed course. The Camaro flated behind a battered pickup, followed faithfully, its nose peppered with dead bugs, collected like war medals. Dust clung to its tires, and its stripped, acid-dipped body carried the quiet arrogance of something built to destroy expectations.
Ow.
Smokey didn't say much on that long westward haul. He didn't have to. He was chasing something bigger than just Bonneville, and he wasn't about to warn anyone what was coming. An unplanned audience. When Smokey rolled into Riverside, he wasn't alone. Hot Rod Magazine's Jim McFarland was already waiting, camera at the ready, eager to catch whatever magic Unick had cooked up this time. Smokey insisted it was just a stopover, a casual meet before heading for the Salt Flats. But what unfolded on that track was anything but casual. Within minutes, a Goodyear representative quietly dropped off a fresh stack of racing tires, unannounced but expected. Then, as if on cue, IndyCar veteran Lloyd Ruby appeared, helmet in hand, cool, calm, and ready. McFarland watched the pieces fall into place and realized what was happening. This wasn't improvisation. Smokey Unick had orchestrated a secret test, carefully calculated down to the second. There would be no announcements, no fanfare, and no explanations. Just speed witnessed by the few who understood what real engineering dominance looked like. Ruby's secret laps. The Camaro sat trackside looking unlike anything Chevrolet had imagined. Dictated its body had been acid-dipped until razor-thin. Reshaped with surgical precision for minimal drag, and lowered with suspension geometry that seemed to defy the rules. It didn't just look fast, it looked dangerous. Lloyd Ruby slid into the driver's seat without a word. No warm-up, no hesitation. Smokey leaned against the pit wall, arms folded, cigar smoke curling into the California air. With a barely perceptible nod, Smokey gave the signal. The Camaro came alive. First lap, cautious, smooth, the big block engine rumbling low and steady. Second lap, harder, faster. The V's thunder rolling across Riverside's grandstands. Third lap, devastating. Ruby tore past the timing booth at a pace faster than the previous year's pole time. Nobody had expected that. Not Ford, not Goodyear, not even McFarland, who struggled to keep his camera focused as the Camaro devoured the track. Ruby rolled into the pits and stepped out silently, sweat glistening beneath his helmet. Smokey gave him a slight grin, but said nothing. He didn't need to. The car had spoken. Within minutes, the Camaro was back on the trailer, strapped down, its secrets hidden once more beneath tarps. Smokey climbed into his truck, gave one last glance at the stunned faces around him. And just like that, the man, the machine, and the mystery disappeared west, bound for Bonneville. October sunlight spilled across the Bonneville salt flats like liquid fire, blinding in its brilliance. The white expanse stretched endlessly in every direction. An alien stage for those brave enough to gamble with physics and mortality. Smokey arrived with 3 Camaros. 2 small blocks, 1 big block, and spare engines stacked like ammunition. But his black and gold number wasn't just another entry. It was his masterpiece, his secret weapon built not just to compete but to dominate. Bonneville had seen fast cars before, but nothing like this. Smokey Unick was here to dismantle expectations, rewrite history, and humiliate anyone foolish enough to doubt him. The salt course stretched in a straight, merciless line, made of unforgiving terrain where engines screamed, metal flexed, and human courage was pushed past its limits. Smokey had assembled a driver lineup that mirrored his ambition. Legends like Mickey Thompson, the relentless speed king; Curtis Turner, NASCAR's outlaw; Bunky Blackburn, precise and unflappable; and Johnny Patterson, fearless and unyielding. Each man took his turn behind the wheel of the Camaro, and each returned wide-eyed and silent, shaken by what the car demanded and delivered. At over mph, the Camaro howled across the flats, the sound carrying for miles in the open desert air. The salt roared beneath the tires like a living thing, exploding into clouds of white crystals behind them. And yet, run after run, the car begged for more. For relentless days, Smokey Yunickk's team lived and breathed on the edge. Engines were swapped, tires shredded, bolts tightened until knuckles bled. And the Camaro answered, record after record fell, shattering benchmarks not by inches, but by miles an hour. We kept breaking our own marks, Smokey later recalled, and he wasn't exaggerating. By the end of it, the Camaro had rewritten everything Bonneville thought it knew about speed. Its national, international, flying start, standing start, one-time mile KM, it didn't matter. The Camaro devoured every category thrown at it. But beneath its thin, polished skin, this wasn't just a Camaro. Smokey had built a machine that lived somewhere between ingenuity and defiance. A car designed to dance on the knife's edge of legality. Its acid-dipped body carved through air with almost impossible efficiency. Its suspension geometry, relocated and reimagined, gave it stability at speeds engineers swore were suicidal. Every panel, every hidden modification, every untraceable trick whispered the same truth. Smokey Yunick wasn't following the rules. He was rewriting them, and not everyone was happy. The FIA bristled. Ford fumed. Even GM, the company that built the Camaro, distanced itself from the entire affair, pretending not to know Smokey when reporters came calling. Because this wasn't just about engineering anymore. This was defiance in its purest form. One man standing against the establishment, backed only by his wits, his will, and a black Camaro designed to make history. By the time Smokey loaded the Camaro onto the trailer for the final time, the salt flats were littered with the ghost of broken records. Engines were burnt, tires melted into black streaks across the endless white, and men staggered around in exhaustion, their bodies spent and their minds fried. Smokey, though, was silent. He stood at the edge of the course, staring at the horizon, as if he could already see the next battle waiting there, because he knew this was on over. The records were his. That much was undeniable. But the storm was coming. Rivals would demand investigations. Sanctioning bodies would rewrite their rule books. And in Detroit's glass towers, Ford executives were already sharpening their knives. Smokey Yunick hadn't just broken records at Bonneville. He had declared war. Racing in the dark, the night hung heavy over the salt flats, thick with silence and tension. A cold wind swept across the open Nevada desert, rattling the aluminum shrouds of the pit area and carrying with it the distant hum of engines waiting to scream. There were no grandstands here, no flashing lights, no cheering crowds, only darkness, dust, and men who had decided they'd rather wrestle with death than live quietly. This was Smokey Yunick's world, where the line between genius and insanity blurred, and where speed was worshipped like a god. Out there, the course stretched endlessly into black nothingness, a me-gauntlet of salt and shadows. At MPH, there was no horizon, no reference point, just darkness swallowing everything beyond the glow of the Camaro's headlights. Sticks hammered into the earth every yards were the only guides the drivers had, and they weren't reflective. They disappeared into the night like ghosts, barely visible until you were already on top of them. One wrong move, one missed marker, and you'd be swallowed by the abyss. But Smokey Yunick's Camaro wasn't built for caution. It was built for war. The edge of control. At full throttle, the car became something more than metal. It became a predator, hurling itself across the salt with a ferocity that defied physics. The big block motor screamed at RPM, pulling the Camaro past MPH, the roar drowning out every rational thought. But with speed came danger, and the danger was relentless. Above MPH on the straights, something terrifying began to happen. The driver said they could feel it before they saw it. The front end would start to lift, weightless, the tires barely kissing the salt. Steering became guesswork. The car floated, shivering like it was trying to escape gravity itself. The salt flats had no walls, no barriers. If the Camaro took off, there was nothing between the driver and oblivion. Smokey knew it. He understood it better than anyone, but he didn't care. To him, racing wasn't about playing safe. It was about taking the rules of engineering, bending them until they screamed, and daring the universe to break first. The salt, the cold, and the clock. The nights were brutal. With no sun, the desert temperatures dropped like a stone, turning the flats into a frozen wasteland. Drivers would step out of the car with their breath steaming in the air, hands trembling from cold and adrenaline. The salt underfoot crunched like shattered glass. And yet the work never stopped. The engines hated the cold as much as the men did. Oil thickened, radiators refused to warm, and metal parts shrank and seized. Cars built for violence had to be coaxed to life like wounded beasts. Smokey, ever the mad scientist, started covering the stock radiators, wrapping them tight to trap heat until the engines clawed their way up to proper operating temperature. Only then could the flogging begin. kind of relentless, punishing runs that tested the Camaro's limits and the men inside it. And yet, even in the freezing darkness, there was something alive out there. You could feel it. The tension, the obsession, the refusal to accept defeat. Every run was a battle, and every mile per hour gained was stolen from nature itself. Glory never came without blood and smoky okies. Camaro left plenty of wreckage behind. The big block car, the team's pride and terror, pushed harder than anything else on the flats, and it paid the price. During one brutal hour record attempt, the Camaro was running flawlessly, eating mile after mile at over mph when the rear end suddenly let go. Metal screamed, the back of the car snapped sideways, and only instinct saved the driver from disaster. They rolled it back into the pits on a stretcher of salt, the broken pieces of its rear assembly glinting like shrapnel under the work lights. Another time, the small block Camaro, lighter, sharper, but just as unforgiving, hit a patch of standing water. At that speed, water was no different than ice. The car lurched, the tach spiked, and in an instant, the engine overrived, snapping a valve clean. The silence afterward was deafening. The kind of silence that tasted like failure. And then came the worst one. The big block had been flawless that night, holding a steady rhythm, pulling like a locomotive at over RPM. Then, without warning, a valve floated. It was subtle at first, just a tremor in the motor's voice. And then, catastrophic, a single valve slammed through a piston, shattering metal, heat, and pressure into chaos. The car coasted to a halt, smoke curling into the cold night. The men stood around it, silent, exhausted, their faces lit by the pale white glow of the moon. No one cursed, no one shouted. They just stared, because deep down they all knew this was the price of chasing gods. Smokey Yunick wasn't like other builders. He didn't care about tradition, and he sure as hell didn't care about playing by anyone else's rulebook. He didn't see limitations, saw opportunities hiding in plain sight. If the rulebook didn't forbid something explicitly, then to Smokey, it was legal. Always McFarland. One of the crew would later laugh about it. Smokey was a loner. But there's one thing he'd always say when he got into the rulebook, and that was, they never said I couldn't. That was his religion. The man built cars the way outlaws rob banks, not because it was easy, but because someone said it couldn't be done. Every sleepless night, every frozen hand, every destroyed engine. It wasn't just about breaking records. It was about breaking assumptions. Smokey didn't just want speed, he wanted dominance. He wanted to prove that cleverness and courage could beat resources and reputation. The dark hours. As the night stretched on, the Camaro roared back to life, rebuilt and reimagined under the brutal glow of the work lights. The drivers strapped themselves in, their faces pale but determined. Outside the car, the cold gnawed at exposed skin, but inside the heat from the engine turned the cockpit into a furnace. It smelled of oil, salt, and something more primal. Fear mixed with obsession. The headlights pierced the void, twin blades cutting through an ocean of darkness. And then, with a single nod from Smokey, the driver buried the throttle. The Camaro lunged forward, tires clawing at the salt. The sound exploding into the night like distant artillery fire. Revolutions, miles gone in a blur. The sticks whipped past in the edge of the headlights, each one a heartbeat, each one a reminder that a single mistake meant disaster. Out there, speed wasn't just a number. It was a living, breathing thing. Something wild and untamed that demanded sacrifice. At those speeds, the mind stopped thinking in words. There was no past, no future, just the constant hum of danger. The car vibrated like a living animal. Its heartbeat synced to the driver's own. And then, just as the Camaro touched mph, that sickening, weightless feeling returned. The front end lifting, the steering going soft, the horizon vanishing into nothing. The driver didn't lift. He couldn't. Not here. Not now. By the time the early S rolled around, most believed the legendary number Camaro had been lost to time, myth whispered about in racing circles, an engineering outlaw erased from the track and buried beneath decades of forgotten history. The car that once terrorized Sebring ruled Daytona under Don Yenko and shattered. Bonneville's speed records had disappeared into obscurity, leaving only grainy photographs, dusty race sheets, and Smokey Yunick's polarizing reputation behind. But fate has a strange way of resurrecting legends. The story begins with Vic Edelrock Jr., an automotive titan in his own right and one of the most influential figures in American performance engineering. Edelrock had grown up idolizing innovators like Smokey Yunick, and when whispers began circulating about the possible whereabouts of Smokey Yunicks' outlaw Camaro, he became obsessed. There were rumors of a black and gold machine sitting somewhere in upstate New York, far from Daytona's warm sun, abandoned, battered, and nearly unrecognizable. Edelrock didn't dismiss it as another racing tall tale. He started digging, making phone calls, chasing leads, pulling threads that went back decades. Then, in what almost seemed like divine coincidence, an old acquaintance put him in contact with someone who had seen a Camaro matching the description. The details sounded unbelievable. A race car, once driven by legends like Alan Sayre and Don Yenko, left stranded in the brutal northeast winter, hidden beneath layers of snow and neglect. When Vic finally arrived at the location, the sight before him was surreal. There, under the weight of decades, the Camaro was half buried beneath a snowbank. Its once vibrant black and gold livery dulled by rust and time. The front fascia poked out defiantly, as though the machine itself refused to be forgotten. The faded number still clung stubbornly to the body panels, a ghostly reminder of the car's rebellious past. It wasn't just a derelict. It was a monument frozen in time. The discovery was electrifying, but Edelrock knew what this meant. He couldn't let the car rot away into history. He negotiated its purchase from David Tom, respected historian and founder of the historic Trans Am Registry, who had safeguarded it for years. That deal marked the beginning of one of the most delicate and passionate restorations in American motorsport history. Bringing the Smokey Yunick Camaro back to life was no ordinary project. Every inch of the machine was layered with decades of engineering secrets, racing scars, and stories hidden in metal. Edelrock didn't want a superficial cosmetic revival. He wanted to resurrect the beast exactly as Smokey Yunick built it. This meant painstakingly studying old photographs, poring over race documents, and tracking down Smokey Yunicks' former mechanics, engineers, and even rivals who once accused him of cheating. The restoration team faced an almost impossible challenge. Smokey Yunick never followed a blueprint, never built two cars the same way, and certainly never documented everything he did. His Daytona garage had been a laboratory for innovation, a place where rules were rewritten, often literally. Every illegal tweak and radical modification had been handcrafted with precision. And duplicating those details decades later required both genius and patience. Beneath the Camaro's skin, evidence of Smokey Yunicks' brilliance and defiance came to light. The acid-dipped panels so dangerously thin that sunlight bled through the metal. The sloped windshield that had caused so many arguments in tech inspection meetings. The subtle lowering of the subframe that gave the Camaro its aggressive stance. Every revelation was a reminder that this wasn't just another race car. It was Smokey Yunick's manifesto on wheels, a middle finger to conformity and limitation. Yet restoring the car wasn't just about honoring Smokey Yunick. It was about preserving a piece of American motorsport history, a machine that had been touched by three giants: Yunick, Yuner, and Yenko. In its DNA were the echoes of Sebring, where Al Yuner and Lloyd Ruby had dueled Mark Donohue for pole position. Embedded in its scars were the memories of Yenko's citrus victory. The roar of the crowd as his white-liveried Camaro crossed the finish line first, and hidden deep in its veins was the spirit of Bonneville, where Smokey Yunicks' radical engineering pushed speed records into uncharted territory. As Edelrock's team carefully stripped away decades of grime and corrosion, they uncovered fragments of its past. Layers of paint revealing old liveries, repaired welds from races long forgotten, and even traces of salt embedded deep within the undercarriage from its Bonneville exploits. Each discovery told a story. Each component carried history and its imperfections. But Edelrock wasn't content to simply rebuild what was lost. He wanted to restore the Camaro's identity. He reached out to Don Yenko's surviving family members, gathering rare photographs, handwritten race notes, and memories from those who had witnessed its greatest moments. He spoke to drivers who remembered the terror of trying to overtake Smokey Yunicks' illegal masterpiece on long straights, only to watch it vanish ahead untouchable. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together until what sat before them was more than just a car. It was a time capsule, a living embodiment of an era defined by innovation, rivalry, and rebellion. By the mids, the Camaro's resurrection was nearly complete. The engine painstakingly rebuilt to Smokey's original high-compression specifications, roared back to life for the first time in decades, shaking the ground beneath the workshop. When the exhaust barked, it wasn't just metal and fuel speaking, it was history demanding to be heard. For those lucky enough to witness it, the moment felt almost sacred. But as the restored number Camaro sat gleaming under the shop lights, questions began to surface. What would become of it now? Would it be placed in a museum, locked away behind glass, untouchable and silent? Or would it return to the track, its natural battlefield, where the ghosts of Sebring, Daytona, and Bonneville still waited? Edelbrock faced an impossible choice: protect the relic or unleash the legend. And just as plans began forming for its grand reintroduction to the racing world, a phone call came in that would change everything. A collector, a shadow deal, and a proposal that threatened to pull the Camaro away from the public eye forever.